Owain Nosni crouched low on the rooftop, watching the streets below for any sign of his quarry. Something stirred in the pitch black of the street, and he followed it with his gaze, smiling so widely that his sharp teeth caught the faint light and seemed to glow. He chuckled dryly, throwing off the dark cloak that had hidden his form. It stayed in the air for a moment, a single patch still touching his shoulder blades. With a crack they formed into the wings as dark as the sky above, spreading wide as the bones would allow. His claws ripped through the fingers of his dark gloves, popping and cracking as his hands formed into the powerful feet of a dragon. It only took a matter of seconds for him to drop the human facade he loathed to don. He was a dragon. Why should he pretend to be anything less? He smiled, his scaly lips stretched taut to reveal wickedly curved fangs far longer than a human's hand. Silent as his namesake, Death swooped down toward his prey, wings spread wide to slow his descent, and hungry maw open in eager anticipation of the fight that was to come. The dragon below didn't smell him, didn't even hear him. He was far too absorbed in what he was doing. The immense beast had done his work for him. Who else but Yolna would draw the attentions of a dragon, especially one that opposed his throne? He let loose a ferocious roar only seconds before his claws made contact with the red dragon's spine. It was true that he was barely half the size of this giant creature. Yes, by all rights he shouldn't have been able to overthrow him. But Owain Nosni wasn't a normal creature. He never had been. Quill was sent flying, his immense body crashing into the side of a merchant building with such force that the wall fell atop him. The red dragon let loose a cry more rage than pain, the sound far louder than his opponent's roar. With a fierce snarl, the guardian climbed to his feet, shaking loose the debris that covered him. The fangs he bared put Death to shame, making the fight look far too much like a house cat challenging a lion. But this little cat was not one to be underestimated. Quilzane tightened every muscle in his body, letting them loose. He twisted his neck with such force that the limbs should have been wrenched free of his shoulder blade. The black dragon only cackled, jerking his wing free of Quill's grasp with an ease that had to have been exaggerated. He didn't escape completely, though, for Quill jerked his head to the side to catch the thin membrane in his teeth. Though he clacked his maw shut with all the force he could muster, his fangs couldn't penetrate the wing, skidding off harmlessly. Before he could get away, Death swung his tail at the guardian, the spikes that jutted from the bony club catching a chink in his natural armor and ripping through his flesh as easily as it would parchment. That weapon was an edge that tipped the scale to the Dragon King's favor. Never before had Quill seen or heard of anything like it. Death had crafted it himself, using the devious imagination that had enabled him to topple the entire hierarchy of Nuul. He swung it back again, preparing to unleash a blow to the chest that would kill the larger dragon. Quill was in the air by the time it came about, the club merely slipping off of the thick scales of his tail. He pumped his massive wings again, ignoring the pain and the blood that poured far too easily from his wound. The jagged line stretched from his right wing to his chest, carving a deep furrow that let forth blood as molten as the planet's core. He touched his left claw to the wound, looking for a moment at his bright blood that was more orange than red. His head snaked down toward the dragon below him, and he let loose a roar that erupted from the very depths of his massive chest. Death smiled, answering him with a slight growl that sounded like a purr. Quill was out of range of his claws and tail, but not his breath. It would do him no good, though. A dragon's scales wouldn't burn. The creatures were born of fire. It caused them no harm. With a fierce smile, Death leapt into the sky after him, his slighter form allowing him far more agile and swift movements. Quill pumped his wings faster, soaring high above the streets of Alanna in an attempt to find a better place to make a stand. He did not doubt that he would lose this battle, but he would not give up without a fight. He screamed as Death's teeth clamped onto his tail, the smaller dragon wrenching his neck with the force of his entire being. Quill was tossed over his body, fighting to flip his massive form over so that his wings could propel him. Death pounced on him, folding his own wings for a moment as his sharp claws dug into Quill's scales. He lunged at his neck, meaning to sever the main arteries that ran just below the red scales. Quill snaked his head toward Death's own neck, forcing the smaller creature to defend rather than attack. Death smiled, seeing that his trap had worked. He pushed away from Quill's body, spreading his wings wide as the wind swept him higher into the sky. The guardian's eyes widened when he realized what the other dragon had done, and with a howl he tried to twist his body around. But it was too late. He was already below the rooftops. So, without a sound, Quilzane, son of Zatir, fell to the streets of Alanna and did not stir. Owain Nosni could hear screaming in the distance. Out of the corner of his eye he could see humans scampering about like farm fowl. He gave none of this heed. Whoever escaped would be caught later. Everyone's time would come. All would come to acknowledge him as the true king, or they would die beneath his claws. He turned back to the forge and was surprised to find that it was only a few feet away. He started toward the old building, but before he could take a single step a banshee's scream reached his ears. His body froze, one foot held only inches above the ground and his tail halfway curled over his spine. What sort of creatures could Yolna call upon? How much of her memory had the human girl recovered? Was he the one underestimating her? When a dwarf emerged from the shadows he smirked, throwing such thoughts to the wind. He recognized the healer instantly. Her hard face was one that had burned itself more deeply into his memory than his own mother's. The keeper of the stones had watched over him since he had hatched, had stood by his nest even before his life had begun to form within the opalescent egg. She was his nursemaid, and that of his brother, assigned by the Vestarian Council to watch over the boys as Quill had been asked to watch Yolna. He smiled, no remorse touching his eyes as he charged toward Giselle. The dwarf spread her legs wide, cracking a whip the likes of which no human could hope to wield. It was composed of a metal tempered with an edge that could easily slice through stone, a weapon designed to kill his blood. Though Death himself showed no hesitation as he took it between his teeth, whipping it from her grasp and tossing it behind him. Years ago she would have called out to him, seen in those merciless eyes the dragon infant she used to care for. But no more. She had stopped trying the last time they had fought. Instead, she pulled a broad dagger from her belt, tossing it with all the strength of her blood at the point where neck and shoulder joined. It sped toward him, its accuracy and the force behind it causing the weapon to bite through the scale and into the tender flesh that lay beneath. He yelped, swiping at the poisoned blade with his claws. It held the same mixture he had used on the Amoni. It didn't matter if it was ingested or injected. It had the same effect either way. Giselle took the moment offered to her, tucking into a roll that sent her beneath his stomach and past the reach of his tail. She jumped to her feet and grabbed her whip just as he turned to face her. She cracked it with a blinding speed only seconds before he could breathe flame, using a skill that frightened even the Dragon King. The weapon crossed over his left eye, carving through the brow and striking bone. Fiery blood gushed from the wound to blind his vision, searing the only part of a dragon that would burn. He screamed as his life's blood set fire to his eye, burning away any hope of him ever seeing through it again. He sat back on his haunches, clutching his eye with his right claw as his other arm swept about blindly. The back of his foot struck the dwarf with such force that she was sent flying into a building not too far from her fallen comrade. She looked at him for a moment, then tried to stand. She cried out and clutched at ribs that were broken beyond repair. Blood seeped through her bodice, forming countless dark stains. Her grip on the whip loosened, the weapon falling from her numb fingers. Her eyes clouded over and her gaze rolled up toward her brow, her form falling to the ground like a rag doll. Death didn't try to hide the smile of triumph that crossed his lips, though somewhere deep in his mind he regretted the loss of his nursemaid. A nearly silent shuffle reached his ears and he turned back to the forge. His ears laid flat against his head for a moment before he recognized who it was. He offered the Durkin a welcoming smile, purring slightly as he stepped out of the shadows. The man wore his Dapari and a pair of loose pants, a spear clutched tightly in his fists. He looked just as he had the day they had met so long, long ago. "Why do you resist, Philippe? I've taken your family, 2 of your homes, your country, your village, anything that you ever held dear. Tell me, what is there left for you to fight for? Why not just surrender and have it all over with? Wouldn't it be so much simpler that way? I can't exactly claim the death of her father, but I did instigate it. I've taken her mother. I've killed her brother. Just give me the girl, and I will let you be." Philippe took a step back as though death had dealt him a physical blow. Apparently he hadn't known about Lunai. The dragon chuckled, lowering his head and speaking to the man in tones solely reserved for the oldest and dearest of friends. But the light in his eyes was at odds with his voice. His was the gaze of a demented soul, one who reveled in blood spilt in the reign of chaos. "You think she just went off into the Zyra to die? She probably told you it was a custom of the ones that had raised her, yes? Let me clue you in, Durkin. She ran away. True, she did it to protect her children. The silly woman thought I could only find her. Now, we know that she was wrong, but how was she to know that if she had stayed, her son might still be alive? My people found her 4 years ago, sneaking around the Durkane border. I put her in the darkest of my dungeons. Let her sit there, all alone. Let her wait for the day that I capture her daughter. Let her watch as I kill her only heir to the throne." He smiled wider, clacking his jaws in anticipation of that day. When he looked once again to Philippe, his gaze had changed. The smile melted from his lips, and all joy left his eyes. He crouched low and roared at the man with all the force of his being. Philippe did not even flinch. "Now give her to me!" He tightened his grip on the spear, knowing that he had about as much chance of defeating this creature as his companions. The black dragon showed signs of a battle, but far too few for the warriors he had just faced. His left wing hung limp where Quill had nearly ripped it from his body, blood running down the entire left side of his face from the furrow Giselle had caused. He was blind in that eye. Philippe had no way of knowing if it was permanent or if it would only last for a few moments. All he knew was that his chance was now, and that if he let it pass it was unlikely that he would get another. So he hefted his spear, making the dragon think he was charging to the right, only to turn at the last moment. "You'll never have her!" Death moved to block his blow, realizing too late that he was defending the wrong side. The Durkan dug the metal tip of his spear into the wound, thrusting his curved dagger into the chink between skull and neck. Death winced, but the action was so slight Philippe may only have imagined it. Death laughed, the deep-throated chuckle striking fear into the Durkan's brave heart. The dragon twisted his head, knocking the man to the ground several feet away. His back hit the wall of the very fort he had fought to protect, sending blinding pains up his spine. The last thing the Durkan saw was the Dragon King crouching low before him, preparing to charge into the building with the full force of his weight. "I'm sorry, Yolna. Lunai." Those words were scarcely more than a whisper, their tone so low that the dragon hadn't heard him. But somewhere deep within the dungeons of Jamasa a prisoner stirred, gripping to the bars of her cell with a force strong enough to grind the iron to powder. And deep in the Lozira a young girl jerked awake, sweat beaded upon her brow and a nightmare that had been all too real still haunting her mind. At the same moment both let loose a wail that sent chills down the spines of all within hearing distance, the cry of mother and daughter a perfect match of grief and loss, but also one of defiance.